Okay, guys, I'd like to share some pictures of the garden and some of the pests that we dealt with this year. So here's a acorn squash bed um, back in early September, and I there were bugs on the plant. So there's a squash blossom. So the plants certainly had their leaves, they had their blossoms, which meant that they were, if they were pollinated and fertilized, we would end up with these acorn squash that you can see here. But there's damage in the vine, there's some damage on the leaves, and the reason for that damage for some of the damage can be seen if you look closely for some of the insects that cause this type of thing on squash plants. So I'm looking on the leaves, and um, there's another flower, and there is one of the beetles, which is the Mexican bean beetle. And there on the squash plant, it looks like it is damaging that blossom. So that is certainly one of the pests on this plant, but there's even a more significant one, which I will show you with further inspection here. So it wasn't entirely damaged. We still had some acorn squash, so that's good. And it's certainly not the goal to eliminate all pests, but just to manage them. There's also, okay, so here's what I wanted to show you guys. These are squash beetles here, and there's a close-up of one. These will eat leaf, eat stem, and make open wounds in the plant there that then you can get other infections by fungus and things like that as well. So these adult beetles that you're seeing here were something that I didn't see till later in the summer. But earlier in the summer, if I looked carefully at the bottom of the leaves, I did see some of their eggs, which is one of the methods I try to control the squash beetle and keep their numbers from being very high is looking on the underside of leaves, looking for the eggs, which you'll see right there, and smashing them with my finger. And they're easily smashed in the egg size. And then also that other shot you saw is when they first hatch out. They're these small insects also smashed. So I would look for these eggs and try to destroy them before they got a chance to hatch and then develop into the adults, which would damage the plants. Here, I'm showing you guys on the right is a Mexican bean beetle, and on the left, a ladybug. So they do look very similar, especially if you don't have them next to each other to compare, but their color's a little different. Ladybug, good. Mexican bean beetle, bad. So there's the acorn squash patch. And certainly I want to show you guys this great shot of what I call a squash house. That is all squash growing up over that support system. There is some of the um, birdhouse gourds, and we had, pretty productive plants despite having these pests in the garden. So in the garden, we plant mostly winter squash, and I do this because there's something that is going to then ripen late in the fall and store well for students at school. If we planted summer squash like zucchini and squash, they would zucchini and yellow squash, they would be ripe in the summer when you're not there. So there's a pumpkin, and this structure does a great job of holding up the vines, which helps with air circulation, and may also help with pests. And this one squash in particular, the birdhouse gourd, does really well. And it is one of the kinds that is less susceptible to some of the insect pests. Whereas acorn squash that I showed you before is damaged easily, the birdhouse gourd, not so much. And there's a butternut squash also is a little less damaged by those types of insects that I showed you earlier. So we had a pretty good harvest, a great harvest of the birdhouse, and an okay of the yellow squash. Okay, then next I want to show you guys the dry beans. And again, I grew all dry beans, which is something that you eat just the seed. You store them dry like a black bean, a soup bean, so that you can store them for a long time and eat them throughout the winter. The plants look good initially. There's some of the bean you can see. That red is the flower of these particular bean plants, and so you need flowers to get the beans. This, though, is the pest and the damage that we had. That's the bean beetle, Mexican bean beetle, and on the top picture you have the different stages: the egg, the larva, and then the adult. And it does look somewhat like the ladybug, but it's ladybugs are redder, have less spots, and they are beneficial insects because they eat other insects, whereas the Mexican bean beetle on the right, bad. So there are ways to control it. Monitoring is one. In the summer, inspect the underside of leaves, smash any egg clusters, smash any of the younger or adults. The other thing that we are doing right now is to bag infested plants, which means we're going to take any of the bean plants that remain in the garden and we're going to put them into the garbage rather than a compost. So we're not leaving behind that insect pest to intentionally leave it there in the garden for next year's bean crop. So there's several things that you can do to kind of control them. And I've been picking the insects throughout the growing season. We're going to get rid of them. I wanted to point out not all bugs are bad. Here's a praying mantis, and they are famous for being pretty spectacular predatory insects. They have those front arms, they can reach out and grab things and eat them. So, those are the types of insects we do want in the garden. Along with the ladybug beetles, like I showed you guys, those are things that will eat other insects. So we certainly don't want to eliminate all insects. That wouldn't be a good system or a very sustainable system over time. Um, there is a process called integrated pest management, abbreviated IPM, and this is what a sustainable system would look like. It involves preventing the buildup of pests, monitoring while plants are growing for pests and trying to control them with monitor and then treatment. This is a page from URI. They have a whole department over there, integrated pest management, that is giving information from science on how to best control pests. And as you can see in this picture, even though we had pests, we also had some great squash, some healthy plants, healthy enough to flower, to be pollinated and fertilized, and then produce squash this season.